what's really important when you're starting a business is to not trick yourself into being a salesman to yourself or to the team. When you take an internal perspective, it's really important to take just an absolutely like cold analytical approach to what is working, what is not working, and don't lie to yourself.
Welcome to an IBC Impact interview. Today I am interviewing Alessandro DiSanto, and very excited for this interview because you and I met a few years ago and our friendship just skyrocketed really quickly. And you were president of the SIBC at the time. You're an incredible person. I just feel so blessed to have you as a friend. And you've done amazing things. You're so talented in your career, and now you're doing something incredible. You were in banking at Goldman. You're at GTCR private equity, already in the upper echelon of everything. And then you left it all to be a co-founder at Hallow, a Catholic meditation app, prayer app that is just doing incredible things right now. And because of our mutual love for the Catholic faith, I'm so excited to be able to dive into your story, to introduce you to others in the community, because it is a wonderful story and you're also just incredibly smart. And so I imagine a lot of people, both alumni and students, will be able to learn a lot from this. So anyways, Alessandro DiSanto, welcome to the Impact interview.
Thanks so much, Matt. That was way too gracious of an intro, and I'm fearful that is just setting me up for failure at this point. But it's a real pleasure to join, and very much so thankful for all the work you're doing for the IBC, and really having gotten that going over the past few years. And the pleasure has definitely been mine over the past few years getting to know each other.
Have you been listening to the humility prayer list?
That's pray list.
Pray list.
Get up on the lingo. But no, it's been a really humbling journey over the past coming up on 5 years. It was supposed to be a 5-year reunion from Notre Dame this coming June. It's been, but we'll have to reschedule the reunion.
That is really sad. I had my 5-year reunion 2 years ago, and it was really fun. So I hope they reschedule that and you guys get to fully live it up.
I'll be praying for that. I feel most deeply for the seniors. I couldn't imagine what they must be going through with the second semester, senior year being suspended, but we'll find a way to reschedule.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, you graduated Notre Dame in 2015. Is that correct?
That's right.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about, I actually really enjoy when you talk about your pre-Notre Dame, a little of your family background, because you come from an Italian family and you speak with such pride about it. So give us a little bit of that before we jump into your more modern day current stuff.
Sure. Really loved growing up in a very Italian-American household. My mother was born and raised there. My dad is Italian on his side as well. Grew up very traditional story. My aunt's uncle's mother ran a few pizza shops, pizza and sub shops. My dad and side of the family had a construction company, and so really grew up in that, very close knit. Everybody lives within 15 minutes of each other, working together, socializing together, big meals. We make homemade wine, and had the blessing of my grandparents who never learned English. My grandmother's still around. Moved in when I was born, and so had them in the house, and really just love that part of what I've been blessed with in life.
That being around family is probably why you're so comfortable. I had the privilege of watching you give a leadership talk at the Notre Dame SIBC Leadership Summit, and you were fantastic. You just, being around people, you're just so good. You're so comfortable, charismatic. You did a great job.
I very much appreciate
that. Explains it.
In a big long table with a lot of people, you got to be able to speak up. So I definitely have tried to maintain that confidence for sure.
Yeah, and then at Notre Dame, tell us. You were co-president of the SIBC. Tell us a little bit about your time there.
Yeah, absolutely. I came in, so I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I got interested in a lot of different things along the way. I ended up taking 21 credits each semester for the first 3 years, trying to get just as many different things in as possible. I was on the mock trial team for 2 years, thought I potentially might go to law school, got into architectural physics was a passion, which is very random, but got really into Dante.
None of this surprises me, though.
Dante and medieval early Renaissance poetry, the Commedia, Inferno, Paradiso, and Purgatorio were probably my favorite books outside of the Bible. Those got really into that, but ultimately caught the finance bug, as is increasingly common in Mendoza, and so I ended up double majoring in finance and econ. Had great experiences as a travel team member with the SIBC, where that passion really exploded. Ultimately was blessed to be on the leadership of the SIBC, both as a junior and senior on the executive board, as well as the Wall Street Club leadership, International Market Watch, and a few other the finance organizations. So was really ingrained in the finance culture of Mendoza, which led ultimately to a series of internships, ultimately leading to investment banking after graduation.
So before we get into, because what I am really excited about with this interview is you follow, and I mean this in the best way possible, but you follow more of the path that I think a lot of students emulate or desire right after college, the banking, Goldman being the pinnacle one, probably, or one of, and then going to GTCR and private equity. So very much that traditional path. And then you jump to Hallow, which we'll get into. That's completely, I mean, startup, risky, incredible vision, cool stuff. So before we get to that latter stuff, because there are a lot of students that if they're watching this, they might be sophomore, juniors, everything's getting so competitive. What was your experience like in the banking and the private equity as a whole? Obviously people know really long hours, really competitive, but it obviously has prepped you a lot to where you're at today. So what did you take away from that experience, and maybe some pros of it, maybe some cons that can help people get more familiar with that career path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I had an absolutely phenomenal experience both in banking and in private equity. I really look back fondly on those memories and still have a deep passion for finance. I think on the really exciting, most positive things I remember and learned, finance is one of those positions, especially when you're talking about investment banking, where you learn very early on a really deep set of wide-ranging professional skills. And so you're put in small teams doing complex things, and ultimately you're being hired not because of what you know, because ultimately graduating seniors know very little in all fields except maybe accounting and medicine or something. But the idea of your ability just to learn quickly and be curious, not just to be satisfied with a surface level answer or buzzwords, but to really understand how, in this case, businesses work and understand what drives value in business was probably the most core thing that I learned. Obviously, you gotta drink out of a fire hose and take in a lot of information, which I think is really just how you compound progress in your career very early on. And so that was really a huge one. One, I think I definitely learned the value of working with people you like and respect, particularly right out of the gate in a place where I was. It can be intimidating to move to New York City and work at a big investment bank, but to find people that really have a long-term perspective, high in integrity, and understand. I recall being in client situations where we could have easily recommended something that would have generated, kind of immediate fees for the bank, but saying, look, this isn't the right move for you. I'm not going to make any money on this relationship for the next few years, but what we need to be planning for is 4 or 5 years out when this big transition is going to happen. And so that was a surprising thing. I think a lot of people give lip service to that. Seeing that firsthand was really powerful in terms of setting expectation for what best-in-class professional perspective is. And then just being in the room with, serious adults and, just acting like you know what you're doing until you do is definitely something that has value. Particularly once I got into private equity, you're on a very small team managing a significant amount of other people's money, responsible for doing really high value deals, and you're kind of with the team all the time. You're a 23, 24, 25, 26-year old, and you're sitting across the table from CEOs, executive teams, and you're deciding, do I want to buy this business? Is this a good business? And how can we get this deal done? It sounds crazy, but one of the offshoots of you doing all the analytical work, at least in my experience, you then also have to kind of follow through on that. And so I recall, many situations where we're leading a 2-hour meeting with a management team going through financial diligence, and next to me is the VP, and next to them is the partner, and I'm leading the meeting, more or less, in terms of what we're going through, what the questions are, and then taking those insights and going back and putting them into the deck and figuring out what we should be doing. My favorite story. One more thing before my favorite story that I love sharing for this one is, it was literally my first month in private equity. We were looking to do a substantial add-on for one of the companies that we owned. They were looking to acquire another company, and we were in New York at another investment bank. Or we were at the office of an investment bank representing the company we were potentially acquiring. And we had done a lot of work. I was still very much learning what our business did, but we were looking at this other business. And so we're all sitting in this massive conference room at the investment bank. We have our management team on one side, about 10, 12 people, a full C-suite team of our company. Executive team of the opposite company literally across this long table. And then at the head was kind of our investment team. And at the other head was the investment bank coordinating everything. And our team got an email saying a last-minute slot to potentially meet this other management team for a totally unrelated investment came up in, I want to say, Nashville, like the next day. And so our team would have had to leave immediately to make it to the airport at LaGuardia to get down there. But we had like a 2.5-hour, I think, meeting scheduled. And a month into the job, the VP leans over and said, all right, we're going to head out, like, take care of this. I'm just like, yeah, leave. And so, like, okay, that was kind of shocking to the people in the room. But then, both CEOs turned over like, okay, what are we going to do? What should we be talking about? What do you guys need to know? And running that. So that was probably one of the, as a category, most valuable experiences in private equity, just having the confidence to say, this is what's important. Let's figure it out and just have those conversations.
Looking back to that experience where you got thrown into the fire and you were able to handle it, what would you say, if you go back to your college days, prepped you for a situation like that? If someone's hearing this and thinking to themselves, wow, okay, there's no way I could do that. Alessandro must be superhuman. Like, what would you say you got to that point from your experiences leading up to it that gave you the confidence to do that, to essentially, as you almost said earlier, fake it till you make it, and to sit in that situation and handle it? So what would you say is to someone who wants to be able to do that by that age, to get to that point?
Totally. Yeah. It's, I can't remember who the quote is attributed to, but that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You just got to put in the work to put yourself in situations where you execute on things that you want to get good at. One of the exercises that I think is really helpful on an intermediate basis is, and I think we've talked about this before at the SIBC Leadership Summit. On the left-hand side, write your goals. Like, what do you want to be good at? Whether that's learning a language, or learning financial modeling, or learning chemistry, whatever the case is. And on the right hand, break down on an hourly basis what you do every day over the course of a week. And if there are things on the left-hand side that are not on the right-hand side, that's a problem, because that's a recipe for regret and failure. So if you want to get good at something, you have to be doing things to advance those things over time. And it's the little progress over a long period of time, like compound financial interest, that makes huge progress in life. And so for me, that was SIBC projects, without a doubt. So putting yourself in a position where you work hard over a semester so that you can show up, in a company's office and really perform, so that you can be put in a position to be hired, to do that in front of clients in your first job, to get the second job. It's just all of that really compounds. I think one of the best examples of that is I was on a team member of the Goldman Sachs project for SIBC, which I believe is still around. And we worked really hard and over the course of the semester and prepared, each one of that particular team was just so phenomenal. Had some great teammates. Each one of us could have given the entire presentation ourselves, which is always a good thing to aim for when you're participating in a project, to know everything and not just rely on other people to fill the holes. And so made a really good impression. 6 months later, when it was recruiting time, or it was about 3 months away from recruiting time for investment banking internships, a random spot opened up for a preliminary super day that Notre Dame was not a part of, and a managing director at Goldman picked up the phone and said, there's one slot that I could get someone in. Who do I trust to be ready 3 months in advance? And I was fortunate enough to receive that call, and he said, can you fly to New York tomorrow and interview? Like, are you ready? And I said, absolutely, yes, do it. Now I, panicked immediately afterwards, but got to be ready for those moments. Packed up, went to the airport in Chicago, flew to New York, and that led to the internship for the summer, which led to the next job, and et cetera. So just working hard, knowing what you want to work on, doing little things every day to get better, and being ready for those when those opportunities pop up.
And I'd imagine, knowing you, even hearing what you're saying here, but then also just knowing you as a person, you also have the personality where you stretch yourself, because you don't go from A to Z. I mean, you said right there is a really good example where that was a pretty scary thing, and you could have said, no, I'm not ready for this. But you're like, you know what? I'm going to lean into this. Or when you lead an SIBC project, or when you lead the SIBC, like every little step is stretching yourself a little bit further and further and further, and getting you closer, that the jump between where you were in the moment in that conference room to leading it on your own that you weren't expecting isn't as big as it could have been, because you've made lots of jumps getting up to that point. And so I always tell people, stretch yourself as much as you can, and don't be afraid, and sit in some of those anxious spaces where it is a little scary. You are afraid because it does feel a little bit beyond what you believe your core abilities are at this moment. But that's how you then expand your core abilities in that circle further and further.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a great parallel to building physical strength or endurance, right? If you go and you do, 10 sit-ups every day, or maybe a bench press is a better example, but if you go just lift the bar every day, you're never going to be able to lift your body weight unless you weigh unless you weigh 45 pounds. But you gotta, muscle growth only happens when muscles tear, right? And you have to put in effort for growth to happen, and that's 100% true, I think, in everything in life. Say yes, figure it out later.
I was thinking that as you're going through it, but in the back of my mind was thinking of yes theory, or whatever that thing is, where people are always talking about saying yes, because you just seem to say yes to all these tough situations.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the best one yet, which I don't know if the right way is to say yes to it, but yeah, you said yes to God's call to you in this moment to leave quite a high paying and set career trajectory. If you continue to work hard, you're on quite the path, and you decided to completely jump from that to something that is scary, and that's Hallow. So first, tell us what led you to that decision and in the vision of Hallow and getting you to this point.
Yeah, so this is something I can't take any credit for at all personally, but this is what happened to me. So I was working, as we talked about, in private equity. You alluded to the fact that can be a challenging day-to-day life experience, just with hours and stress levels. So it was at a point where, for an extended period of time, I was really experiencing some real pain, just with a lot of stuff going on. And so I was really stressed and anxious. And my best friend from Notre Dame, now one of my co-founders at Hallow, recommended Headspace to me. Well, one of the two kind of biggest secular meditation apps, Headspace and Calm, and to try meditating. And so I tried Headspace, and the way I describe that experience is that it was helpful in that it's definitely physiologically a healthy thing for a human being to do, to sit still and breathe deeply for 10 minutes like that, as a matter of medical principle, is a good thing. But what was interesting is that the more space I was creating on a day-to-day basis, more much deeper questions related to purpose started coming up. Like, what should I be doing with my life? Am I doing the right thing? And then, so I kind of fell off Headspace and just had these nagging questions. Alex, for a bunch of different reasons, personally searching for kind of like, does God exist type questions, went and talked to a former rector of ours at Notre Dame and said, hey, does the church have any of this meditation stuff? Literally got laughed at on the phone and said, yeah, we've only been doing it for like 2,000 years. It's called prayer, contemplative prayer, meditative prayer, whatever. So he found a bunch of really great prayer techniques, which we can get into, but that felt very similar to if you've tried mindfulness meditation, similar in orientation and feeling, but with a focus on spiritual development and personal relationship with God. So he basically said, hey, I'm trying, and we're having dinners on Sunday nights with his now wife, my now fiance, and talking about whatever, and he said, you should try this stuff out. So that was a life-changing experience personally. These specific techniques, just engaging in that type of contemplative prayer, it just immediately opened up a sense of true peace and true calm, realizing that my path is not set just by me figuring things out, but by realizing that there's an alignment to God's will in your life. And that was the deepest sense of peace that I'd ever experienced. That was still a long way away from quitting my job. So over the next couple of months, we really started digging into, if a lot of individual stories along the way, but basically if Headspace could be really successful teaching people secular meditation without having to go to India, and these prayer techniques have really changed our lives individually, why can't a Catholic Headspace or a Christian Headspace exist? And so we built it primarily first for ourselves because we were tired of like reading out of books, closing our eyes, reading out of books, closing our eyes. And we were, Alex coded a super simple version of the app, and some friends from Notre recorded their voices. And so we just had this super simple thing. The big moment for us was discernment moment was we had a friend of a friend, a young woman from Notre Dame, who was considering whether or not she was being called to marry her boyfriend of 3 years. And she called us and said, hey, I heard you work on this thing. Can I try it out, see if it's helpful? And we said, sure, knock yourself out. And then she called us 2 weeks later and said, I can't believe this. I'm going to send you my prayer journals. But I feel like I've finally heard what God is calling me towards. And I think I've found the courage to do it. We're like, okay, what is it? Pretty nervous at that point. She ends up breaking up with her boyfriend and committing to religious life as a religious sister. So like a nun. So that was like, okay, that's a wow moment. We didn't certainly do anything. It was God's grace that provided her for her conversion of heart, and it was her authentic yes that welcomed that grace into her life. But kind of hit us in the face like, hey, you guys have been looking for like your purpose in life. Maybe you just spend a little time thinking of whether it's not, as Alex asked me one Sunday night on my couch, why don't we teach the world how to pray? Which was a pretty crazy experience. It was like 10 p.m. I had another 6 hours of work to do to that night. And I was like, oh, great. Figure that out and let me know what we're going to do, which she ended up doing. And to speed up the story a bit, in the next couple months, spent a lot of time discerning that and ultimately ended up quitting my job in private equity. Others did the same to launch what is now Hallow.
There's so many directions I want to go with that because I'm gonna only briefly go down the theological side just because I love this stuff, but I want us to then come back to some of the lessons that you've learned in business and leadership, but because I love this Catholic side. What I love, I remember you telling me this story, and the power of what you're doing, that silence, that solitude, is very much related to an author that I love, Henry Nouwen, and he talks about that. And he was the first one that pointed out to me in his books, he's not alive, the First Kings 18 or 19, First Kings 19, when Elijah's on the mountain and God's not in the thunder, God's not in the lightning, but he's in this whisper, and the Hebrew word is sod, and it's actually the word that I have on my finger. And so that's always been a big thing in my life, of how silence and solitude is how you hear God's voice, is really his message. The world's telling you all of these different statements. You're only worthy if. And he says we need to channel those out and hear God's voice that says he loves us. And I believe you told me like that's actually a big part of the Hallow side of things. That exact story is maybe not the Henry Nouwen, but the first King Elijah on the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. So big friend of Henry Nouwen. If you go into the intro challenge of the app, the imagery is mountain scenery. And so the idea is prayer being the context of creating a space within which to hear God's voice. And it's that mountaintop experience on an everyday basis. So that is absolutely core to what we believe in. And just a quick aside there, I mean, not to get too deep in the theology stuff, but
I won't stop you.
Alex is, a lot of people go after like the Aquinas and the Aristotles of the world when thinking about proving that God exists. Alex's original reaction to go to have a conversation with our rector was, all right, I'm getting married. I've been bouncing between atheism, agnosticism, theism. It's kind of time to decide what I actually believe in. And he was a mechanical engineer and consulting, so very analytical. I was like, all right, you're supposed to be able to like talk to this guy or whatever God is, and at least in the Christian perspective, have a personal relationship with him. And so his attraction to prayer was, all right, God, if you exist, I'm going to pray every day for a year. And if you talk back, you exist. And if you don't, then either you don't exist, or you don't care, which is effectively the same. And so it's not a bad proof for the existence of God. And so it's what's the worst that could happen? A little bit of Pascal's wager in there. Like, if you're considering like your purpose in life, why not just say, like, I'm going to go to the mountain top, either physically and or in prayer, and say, let's see what happens. So yeah, absolutely, really, really big fan of First Kings.
Yeah, they isn't it G.K. Chesterton that says, I might butcher this, but Catholicism is not tried and found wanting; it's found wanting and not tried. And so his point somewhat is sometimes you have to, when you truly dive in and try it, you don't find it lacking anything. But a lot of times people just don't jump into it. So I love hearing them just the experiential side, just jump in and spend that time with God and pray. That's fantastic. Mine was go try to look at the historical accuracy of the resurrection. That's the approach I took.
There you go. That's a very tried and true approach as well. There's a movie on Netflix that documents a famous reporter that did the same thing and became a big.
Oh, that's probably the Case for Christ movie.
Yes.
Yep. But anyways, let's bring this back to what I would love to hear your thoughts on now is you've had these incredible experiences. You had the boardroom experience. You've had these different ones, and now you're at Hallow, and you are starting something from scratch. What has that been like? Like, what's maybe surprised you? What's excited you? The stresses that have come with it, just to help someone. You've painted a great picture of banking and private equity for people. Kind of paint a picture of what this journey has been like so far.
Yeah. Tons of lessons, obviously. The thing I would start with is in the week before I quit my job, I was like very much on the like, okay, am I going to do this? Should I do this? Alex had made the commitment to do it. Eric, our third co-founder, had made the commitment to go full time. It was basically like an all in or all out moment. And we had a kind of team retreat, which looked a lot like 6 friends hanging out at one of our friends' parents' houses in the suburbs on a Notre Dame game weekend. But so we got up at, so we were going to start at 8 a.m. I worked until, I want to say like 5 a.m. Friday night so that I could have a few hours to run out to the suburbs on Saturday because I was working like 7 days a week. And so I come home, sleep for an hour, like get in an hour-long Uber, sleep in the Uber on the way there, get there. I'm like exhausted, physically destroyed. And so we start and we do it like an hour of group, or like 45 minutes of group contemplative prayer led by one of the now voices of the Hallow app. And in that moment, it was complete peace and complete calm like I've never felt. And in that moment, I knew wherever this is, I need more of it, and I want to help other people find it. And since that moment, So I end up quitting my job the next week and starting. The thing I've not felt is the existential stress of that many founders will talk about, like, is this going to work or not? Like, I have other people depending on me. I've not felt any of that. So mostly because the rest of the team is much better at everything than I am, and do all the hard work. But also because when you find that you really have a huge level of conviction and trust that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that type of fear doesn't exist. And so I would recommend or highlight, I guess, when you really, because one of the things we want to touch on, I think, is like creating your own scorecard and having the confidence to answer your own call. When you find that thing, you really know it, and you can tune out of the other, a lot of surface level stresses and anxieties that I think can be present in careers, or whether it's entrepreneurial or otherwise. So that's the first thing. Couple other random things. Having amazing teams goes a long way. The What you can do with a group of people that you trust and have exactly the same values, and all are really motivated, goes a long, long way. I've gotten to know founding teams where it's a person or two people. We've been extremely blessed from a bunch of people that either on a part-time or full-time basis really believed in the mission and were willing to give to us. So finding a strong community of people that are really bought in is really valuable. Lots of stories of, like, creating things from scratch and Kickstarter type stuff the whole way through to going from zero to, I think we just hit like 200,000 downloads in the past 15 months or whatever. So a lot of things along the way.
It's insane.
The early, just random business takeaway that is striking, I think, and the thing that I wish I would have known the most at launch was when you're in an early adoption, like when you just launch and you're super new. I think people will be familiar with the concept of the adoption curve. We have the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, laggards. When you're in that early adopter phase, all that matters is finding the people that are immediate yeses. Find your power users and just listen to them. I think I had the stubborn mentality of finance of, like, I got to win every conversation. And having originally been focused on partnerships for us, and then now all of growth, there are people that are going to say yes immediately, and then there are people that are just going to take a lot of time and effort to convince and really not be that bought in. When you're starting something new, you just need to find those core power users and really just play to your power audience. If the immediate answer is not yes, or very shortly thereafter, just like give up and move on. Being able to be comfortable with saying, you know what, not the right time or not the right thing. I realize that 9 out of 10 are going to be no's or losses here. I just got to find that 10% and then build that to grow. I think that's really salient. I also think, particularly students who come from places like Notre Dame and other SIBC schools, there's a tendency to think through everything and be like super perfect across everything. That is not an effective or efficient startup strategy or testing new things, even in larger corporate settings. Alex and Eric are phenomenal at taking a minimum viable approach to everything. So you may have heard of like an MVP approach, it's a minimum. What's the smallest amount of effort we could expend to get to something that is viable, but the minimally viable approach? Test it, see what's good about it, keep building that type of thing, see what doesn't work, throw it out, test, iterate, test, iterate. You really got to have that mentality, because nothing's ever going to be perfect. But you don't know until you try something whether it's going to work or not. And so just the fastest feedback loop cycle that you can create of testing, learning, improving, testing, learning, improving is probably like by far the most important takeaway for like early stage starting of things.
I really hope people listening to this right now realize the wisdom you're sharing. I'm just impressed because I'm thinking I've heard some of the smartest people. You're saying this naturally from your own experience, which is amazing. I always loved Richard Branson said, an entrepreneur is someone who jumps off a cliff and then figures out how to build a plane. Like sometimes you got to jump into this thing and kind of figure it out as you go. And don't be stupid and do uncalculated risks. And then Steve Jobs always said, get your product to market as fast as possible. If you wait till it's perfect, it's too late. And you've got to go there, get the feedback, and iterate. And even Elon Musk, I was thinking, so this is a crowd I'm putting you in right now, by the way, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, and Elon Musk.
No pressure.
I'm thinking right now because I'm so impressed with all these things. Because with Tesla, it was the same thing. It's like find the early adopters who love this, who are the diehards, who say yes to this, who want this, who believe in this. And of course, you have all these naysayers. Just ignore them because they're not going to be believers until later. And so the stuff you've done is the things you've said so far are all just so fantastic.
Yeah, just again, big disclaimer. Alex and Eric and the rest of the content and tech team do all the really hard work. I just go about and talk about it, put together some ads and stuff. So I can't take credit for anything, but definitely that has been our experience.
But your job is, this is actually maybe a little bit helpful for people to hear. You're on if I'm the head of growth, is that correct? If I see your email signature, so co-founder and head of growth. So you're the person that's going out and selling this and spreading this. And tell us a little bit about what that experience has been like as well.
Yeah,
doing the sales.
Yeah, there's a couple.
You probably do get a lot of rejection. From time to time.
There's a couple fun things that I would throw in there. So I think people, particularly in school projects, think of like, okay, this is my position. I need to get across that I'm right, and it's a very sales mentality to whatever's being presented, and that's important. And for me, that's really important to have a high conviction, clear, well articulated, and understandable message. What's really important when you're starting a business is to not trick yourself into being a salesman to yourself or to the team. When you take an internal perspective, it's really important to take just an absolutely cold analytical approach to what is working, what is not working, and don't lie to yourself. So in a growth position, I think one of the things founders can fall into trouble with is drinking their own Kool-Aid and thinking everything's going to be great and painting a super rosy picture. You got to be really critical internally to make sure you're actually making good moves. So that's just one kind of common pitfall type thing. It may be obvious to some people listening that the head of growth for a Catholic meditation app's entire professional training was in investing, and those things have nothing to do with one another. So, except for the ability to sit across a room and convince someone about something. So, it's the entrepreneurial mindset generally inside of entrepreneurial endeavors or outside in any job. That thing I talked about at the very beginning, starting the career in finance and having the creativity and curiosity to pursue things to their fundamental drivers is basically the only skill that I had coming into growth. And I was like, okay, how do you attract users? Okay, well, there's two ways to do that. You can either through paid acquisition, ads, or other paid activity, or you can do it organically by creating a platform that naturally attracts people. Okay, let's break both of those down. On the paid side, you can run Facebook ads, you can run Google ads, you can pay influencers on social media, you can have affiliates that you pay on a performance basis. On the organic side, you can write blogs to drive content and have inbound activity. You can have referral networks in the app, and you just start double clicking until you figure out, okay, actually that sounds attainable. That small thing, 4 double clicks down, is something we can do, and let's just do that. And it's such a knowledge-driven market in the world with so many services provided. You can find pretty much any how-to video on YouTube or a white paper from some online service provider that's trying to sell you an upgraded service, but it'll give you a basic understanding for free, and you just figure it out. And you just, that's kind of if one thing got tattooed on my head over the past year and a half, it's well, let's just figure it out. There's that takes an incredible amount of humility, but also confidence, right? You're saying I know that I don't know. I know that if I do this one test, it will give me a small piece of information, and I'll just keep trying until something else works. And we've been super blessed by a great product, which I can't take any credit for. So the product is also ultimately the best salesman. But that's what growth has been for me. It's understanding the core proposition, and then just figuring out things to test and build out skills and whatever needs done at the time.
You remind me again of Steve Jobs here. Keep it up, Alessandro.
I don't own a single turtleneck. I just want to get that out there.
I'm just thinking of that interview when he said, because when you just said here that when you recognize, if you don't know it, you figure it out, you can Google this, there's articles on this, there's how-tos. When he said, when you look around you and realize everything that's been built was just someone who's no smarter than yourself that realized that they could actually change the world. That was an impactful statement. And I think there's people like yourself who recognize, I'll figure it out, I can do this. The people who are doing this tend to not be geniuses or something. They just have this belief that they can change something. And maybe, as I think Steve Jobs even say, they're crazy enough to believe that they can do it and figure it out. And so you actually answered the question I was going to ask, unless you want any more to add to it. I was going to say, if you were to tell any students back some advice you would give, but it sounds like your last answer would really apply to that, of just recognize that you just have to break the problems down. You can figure it out like you did. You had no idea how to do growth for a Catholic meditation app, but you broke it down and did research. You had an intellectual curiosity and you figured it out. And essentially you had a problem and you solved it. It's probably the short way of describing it. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, 100%. I think that two additional reactions. One, to draw on the perspective of the MVP mindset. Students are used to like wanting, 90%, 95%, 100% on tests, right? That's an unattainable goal when it comes to like entrepreneurial settings or professional settings generally. Like, we're going to get to an 80% or maybe even a 70% solution, try it and test. So we talked about that. So like the willingness to test imperfect solutions is one. But then driving always to 100%, which I think students get internally. I don't know if I'm going to short circuit any future parts, but the biggest disconnect I think that comes with a lot of these like crazy talks, like I'm doing all this random stuff in life, is like, that sounds great, but like my parents would like lose their mind if I went and majored in whatever, or I took a job that did something random, or if I had no job and started something. Leadership in general, and I think leadership in your own life, which is ultimately the path to happiness, I would argue, is transitioning from an external to an internal scorecard. Right. So students, particularly though, like students that end up at SIBC schools, are grown in many ways, or brought up, or find their own drive to be really academically successful. And what that internalizes in you is this idea of, I am given a test, or I'm given information, told what to do with it. Here's given the test, do well on the test. And so your skill set is to take input and then provide in a specific output. So you're just kind of a calculation machine or memorization machine. Over time, you need to realize that if someone's giving you the report card, you're never going to really able to discern your own goals, like where you actually want to end up. And when you kind of have the confidence to say, look, I'm not going to take someone else's report card. I'm going to create my own report card and then grade myself on how I'm doing, right? That left side of page versus right side of page. I'm going to grade myself, and that's going to be the ultimate measure. It's hard to do, really hard to do. Really interesting conversations talking to my parents. I was going to leave private equity in the path to, hopefully a top business school to start a prayer app. It's not a super natural conversation, or my girlfriend. But when you do, you wake up every day feeling a lot happier and more confident. So you always have to be conscious of the fact that, if you have student loans, you got to pay those off, and you have to have a realistic sense of personal responsibility along the way to those around you, those that depend on you anyway. But just having the confidence to say, look, this is what I care about, I'm going to go do it. That generally leads to much better outcomes in my experience.
That's fantastic advice. I'm glad you brought that up, and that was going to be the next, the final part we do before getting to some fun questions here. There's literally so many more questions we could ask, but this was great for getting to know you. And now I want to get to a little bit more personal questions. These can be shorter, and just for the listeners to get a chance to get to know more of your personal side as well, even though you've been super transparent and open in this conversation. What is there a business person in the world you look up to?
So the classic answer is Warren Buffett. So big disciple. I've read all the thick books on his entire life. Um, there is something I really enjoy about someone who does the same thing for like 60 years and is just really happy. Like you can just tell he's a happy person. Lives in the same house. I think his parenting philosophy is really strong. His famous line is, "Give your kids enough uh, so that they feel they can do anything, but not so much that they feel that they can do nothing." So that's I really like that. I really like that. Also, just like plain language. I don't do a good job of always adhering to this advice, but using plain language, just understandable everyday metaphors. It just makes everything seem so intuitive and understanding. So I really love Buffett.
You have done a fantastic job on this being intuitive and understanding. But I do remember when I recruited you to edit something, and Alicia said, "Let's have Alessandro do his flamboyant legalese." I think is the word she used for you to spice up a document with some interesting language.
It's important to have that muscle to flex every once in a while, you know, for the right effect, but always the exception to the rule.
Yes. I also know you're a big reader. So what's a book in the last few years that you've read that's, whether it's business or it's personal or theological, that's most impacted you recently?
I'll give you one of your favorites. Hopefully you haven't talked about it recently, but The Concept of Deep Work. So Cal Newport.
Yes.
Uninterrupted, deep, cognitively challenging exercises not only produce better outcomes, but are literally outcomes that are impossible to achieve otherwise. And so there's a deep compounding neural effect of uninterrupted streams of what's called deep work that is not shallow. I think I've changed the way that I work in many ways based on that. I think it's particularly, there are jobs where it is not important, right? If you are bagging groceries, you don't need to, like, deep work is not core to your economic output. Argument for CEOs could go in different directions, but particularly in an environment of knowledge work, really important. And I think not understanding the difference between shallow work and the things that can lead to your literal inability to focus can lead to really foundational anxiety for a lot of people, or for anyone that falls into that kind of trap, which is super easy to do in a world of Slack and email on a second screen while you're doing other things. And so I actually only read a book now when I have a minimum an hour to read continuously, and just force myself into positions where I have to do that. So that's one big one that I know. I also know you love the book, so.
I do. And when you said CEOs, I was thinking of Bill Gates. He used to go to a cabin with, I believe, no reception for 2 weeks. He'd fall off the grid, and that's where some of his best ideas for Microsoft came from.
Yeah, I think it's 2 1 weeks a year. Yeah,
that's exactly right. That's what it is. Yeah. Final question. It's kind of a tough one, but I think for you to be easy. What would you say drives you in life? What gets you up? What gets you up in the day, in the morning?
Yeah, I want to give a non-cliche answer here.
Cliche is okay if it's true.
Yeah. So my answer here is, my standard answer is family, which for me now most recently is fiance. What I've realized is that is a platonic idea that I don't do a really good job of actualizing. Where I was around my family all the time for a really long time, Italian culture, and I very clearly don't live that on an everyday life. I live far away from my family now. I don't have the same cultural experiences. And what I have realized more recently, and kind of a more honest reflection of myself, and more based on my evolution within Hallow, has been to kind of serve the people that depend on me. So I think I used to, honestly, if what did drive me for the first couple of years in finance was going out and becoming like the best, most well-known like person on the team is probably ultimately what if you look at my actions was driving most of them. I think what's really been more fulfilling is to live life saying, okay, how do we help Hallow users today? How do we go out and help people develop spiritual lives? How do I make my fiance happy today? How do I make my mother happy today? Um, Looking for opportunities to demonstrate unusual kindness or compassion has not been the motivator of every day by far, but on days where I can successfully execute that, those are the days that I'm the happiest. So just taking unsolicited time to have a completely non-economic producing conversation with, a student on the phone that I don't know that reached out, or talking to somebody on the street or in the elevator, just having a ways to find create unexpected happiness in others has been the most rewarding.
Doesn't surprise me. You've probably gotten deeper and deeper in your Catholic faith through Hallow, that everything you just described was servants, sacrifice for others, responsibility, very Catholic, very Christ-like mindset. I love it.
I'll also throw out I just bought an Xbox because of the quarantine, so I also live for Call of Duty. So that's
Glad you threw that in there, because I have a feeling people are going to finish this interview and be like, geez, this guy is like superhuman. Glad to know that you like to unwind as a normal human being. You don't just sit and do hours of prayer and contemplative prayer in the evenings.
You don't want to see my prayer log. It's not the most stellar thing in the world. I'm super bummed that the basketball court of my building is closed. I love playing pickup basketball. I am increasingly unathletic, but basketball and more recently running are some pretty fun things.
When that opens back up, I am known for my one-on-one basketball with my college roommate, like 3-4 days a week. And every time I see him, I'm going to visit him actually pretty soon here, right after this, actually in the next week after this interview. And we'll play some one-on-one basketball. So when I'm in Chicago, we got to play.
I am very willing to bet a large portion of my ever decreasing personal net worth in that game on myself. So, but
oh, you're willing to bet it on yourself?
Oh yeah, that's I feel confident in my size.
I thought you were gonna really give me a lot of credit here, and you're gonna say, "I'll bet Matt, you're gonna win." I've got a nimbleness, a height, a shot, and I'm used to some big guys. My college roommate, he's a bigger boy.
I will look. I won't underestimate you, but in my experience, coiffedness of hair or depth of knowledge of AI systems is inversely proportional to basketball skill. So that's that's just one thing.
I love it. Oh, what a great way to end this conversation. Alessandro, seriously, from the bottom of my heart and everyone watching this, thank you so much for taking this time, for sharing your story, for honestly brilliant lessons at every stage of this journey, at your different career paths that brought you here. And so seriously, thank you so much for doing this, man.
It's been my pleasure. I hope it's been useful and not a complete waste of time. If anyone would love to reach out or chat, I'd love to connect. I don't know if we can link my email somewhere, but it's just my first name, Alessandro, ALESSANDRO, at Hallow, HALLOW.app. So definitely reach out. I'd love to chat.
Yeah, definitely. And this will be for people on the community platform. So you'll be able to reach out through the IBC platform as well. Direct message him. Well, and Alessandro, have a great rest of your evening, my friend.
God bless. Thanks, Matt.
Take care.